Hello everyone and welcome to another deck tech on my channel, but this one is going to be a little bit special. I am not alone here. I am actually with the second place finisher of Ascent Utrecht, Taige. How you doing today?
I'm doing fantastic. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for asking, and thank you very much for being on here. It is a pleasure to have you. I know you've appeared on my channel a little bit in some fun videos or casual videos, but this is the first time you're appearing with a deck that you played, piloted, and not only won with, but did probably like the best finish in your career and probably most of the people you know around you locally's career.
Yeah, it was great to finally bring back a spirit to the Pacific Northwest. So super happy to do that.
Awesome. I'm super glad to hear that as well. You have really proven your strength when it comes to this card game, and we are actually going to take a little bit of an in-depth of look at your deck and sort of figure out your thought process, see on why you brought it and the certain cards in this deck itself. And now, for everyone who's not familiar with this deck itself. It has been around for a little bit. We saw it initially appear in Ascent Toronto, but sort of like different variations, and it's sort of evolved a little bit of spice, seasoning, cooking, and everyone's had a little bit of a different variation of it, but this is the one in particular you brought. So let's quickly go over it. In the material deck, we have our Spirit of Water into Silvie and Nico as our champions. And then, of course, your normal draw power in Backup Charger, Grand Crusader's Ring. But we do see an interesting piece of regalia here with Beastbonder Boots, along with a Safeguard Amulet, Terrafring for protection, Viridian Trinket, and then Water and Wind Resonance Baubles. And we're going to pause on this real quick, have everyone remember these two specific baubles, because this is going to be a very important question I want to ask about later. And then the tried and true water card, Scepter of Lumina. You can't go anywhere without that.
Not today anymore.
And then our main deck, we're going to quickly run through these. We've got Cerulean Decrees, Chilling Touches, Fractal of Portal of Depths, which is actually what the deck is named after, which is really cool. Fractal of Rains, Fracturized, and sort of your standard water package, Frostwarns, Icebounds, Lost in Thoughts, Refracting. And then we start to see some of that Silvie tech come in with the Rippleback Terrapins, the turtle which has sort of become an all-star ever since A and B came out. Seaside Reelinger, finally having a deck to be put in and useful. And then the other A and B sort of blockade that made this deck what it is Stratagem of Myriad Ice. And then our lovely Tidestone Bovine. Now, that is sort of the core of the deck, the basis of what we have. All of the decks that are in the same sort of flavor are going to be running those cards, just maybe different ratios or different combinations. But the real skill difference in the making of this deck, in my opinion, is going to be the pilot and the unique choices that pilot makes during this game. And I just want to turn the table over to you here now and ask you, is like, why did you bring this deck in particular?
Yeah, so previously I had been playing the more traditional Sylvie Nico list with a lot more defensive options, Ravishings in the main, and just trying to do that kind of like, beat him over the head with allies and then potentially finish off with Magebane Lash and Ravishing Finale. But a lot of the times it felt like I had too much defensive options and not enough proactive gameplay. So when I saw a super similar list, which is what I based it off of Matt G topping a regional, I was like, oh man, well, this is what I first won my first prize card back in FTC. It was just a 15 card deck that had all four copies of it, and it was Merlin. And I was like, this is great. It's so consistent, it does its thing, and it just kills people. And this deck did exactly the same thing. It aims to be super consistent. It has about 16 to 20 just straight up win conditions, and it's a lot more aggressive than the traditional Sylvie Nico deck. So that's why I wanted to bring it. I first tested it at the Pacific Northwest Oregon Regionals at Mox Valley Games and came in first with it. And I was like, okay, there's some real power here. Because I didn't expect to do that well with a deck that I hadn't really practiced with. But this deck, it just flew out of the gates and was incredible from start to finish.
Nice, and that's wonderful to hear. Sort of the experimentation process, the thought between like, oh, this consistency, I like decks when they're consistent and able to perform, not going to rely too heavily on things, and pretty much every turn you have something playable, which is what you were looking for, which is what you want in Grandarchive at this current moment. You never want to take off turns. The game is so fast paced and lethal that you always have to be doing something, reacting, proactive, something like that. So this deck is a perfect exemplary of it. And let's go ahead and nitpick a little bit about the material deck itself. I know when I was briefly going over it, we see the Wind and Water Resonance Bauble. Usually these baubles come in threes, and for aggro decks in particular, they usually take these for additional draw power. But we see the drop of a Fire Resonance Bauble, and the deck is sort of more mid-rangey. What was the thought process with that?
So in testing, the fire decks didn't really stand a chance because they didn't have a good option to stop Icebound Slam and the throughput thereafter. Like wind decks, you can kind of go a long grindy game with the Veiling Breezes and other things to kind of like interact with the board. But the fire decks like Merlin and the Fire Slimes, if they didn't get out a taunt or intercept unit at the very start, it was basically just over after that first 8 damage and 1 to 2 float being milled. So I felt really confident in going into those matchups from the start. And I think over the course of the day, I only faced 1 or 2 fire matches the whole time. So it worked out really well not having that bauble in the first place because I didn't expect it to be quite as popular.
Then you just sort of had that matchup, what you were wanting, not playing that fire. You didn't really need to rely on that. So super cool. And plus, the water bauble is probably for a lot of those mirror matches as well. You are expecting to see variants of this deck or even the water Arisana. Is that safe to assume?
Yeah, I mean, as you can see, I'm basically pre-boarded for the water matchup with the Scepter, the Viridian Trinket, the Water Resonance Bauble, the Safeguard Amulet. That was basically the biggest hurdle for this deck, was something that could race it. And so if you are pre-boarded and have those options, it helps to be able to proactively put those out. Like the Viridian Protective Trinket, you can just pop it out when you're going for your kill turn. And against the full water decks, there's not a whole lot that they can do because you can kind of count the resources that they're able to play.
And I do want to mention just on that, where you're saying you're pre-boarded against the stronger decks that we saw that won the last Ascent actually, as well, which was Santa Clara, which was the Water Arisana. The Beast Bonder Boots, a very interesting card. You do not actually see this at all. I think this may be the first time we've seen this card in a competitive top 8 list outside of the sideboard. And so what was the particular thinking behind these in the main board?
Yeah, so this was really good with having Tidestone Bovine and the Rippleback Terrapin mainboarded in the deck. Basically, you can bring these out preemptively and say, all right, Water Artisan or whatever stratagem deck, you have to deal with my allies first. And I don't know how you're dealing with a 3/7 turtle or a 2/6 turtle when it has Spell Shroud on Sylvie. So a lot of the times you can just preemptively protect yourself and even do more than what sometimes the Safeguard Amulet can do. Because a lot of the times these decks are interacting at a slow speed with stratagem, so they have to force it out or spend turns fracturizing it or doing other things. The only other change I'd really make is that it would have been really nice to have a Quicksilver Grail on the side to be able to put it under and have an extra layer of protection for that Beast Spawn Boots.
That makes a lot of sense, wanting to go ahead and keep your opponent by surprise. If you guys have not caught the finals, make sure you go ahead and do that. Unfortunately, it was already spoiled. Taige did not take first place, took second, but his opponent did a really good job using that Quicksilver Grill to hide information. So it is a really valuable experience and probably one of the reasons, if I can assume, why you would suggest running that in this deck as well.
Very much so.
And speaking of sideboard, let's go ahead and take a look at yours here now. We have Nullifying Mirror, Smoke Bomb, Frostbind, Frozen Dismissal, Ravishing Finale, and Song of Frost. Was the Nullifying Mirror actually as useful as it needed to be, or did you feel like this was a dead card in the sideboard?
Well, it was entirely dead in the sideboard, but that was more because I figured that as soon as I took it out, I would just face the Kongming Razor Guild deck over and over again. So I didn't want to face that, so I decided I'd just put it in there, and then I ended up dodging all of them. Um, but it did come in a couple of matches. I had in round 11, I faced a Wind Tristan player who was running Veiling Breeze, and I was able to bring it out proactively. I didn't really do anything because I never had the Veiling Breeze when I went for the kill turns. But the theory is still there. And then against other decks, I was bringing it in over the corresponding bubble that didn't work. And I would go ahead and be able to turn off revitalizing cleanses in the water mirrors. It didn't come up super often, but it was more just a hedge to not have to play against the Razor Gale decks in good a time more than anything. Yeah, but going through it, the smoke bombs were incredible. It's another way to draw. It's a way to protect units. It's better under a Quicksilver Grail, as you can see in the finals. Um, but smoke bombs was incredible the whole day, being able to be on board and saying, "Well, sure, you can swing two into it, but it's going to have stealth, and then you're going to waste your whole turn." Um, the two Frostbinds were in there. They got changed out a lot of the times for Tidal Locks when I knew my opponents were going to bring in Nullifying Lantern, or they had shown it game one, just to give a different way to attack it, so that it wasn't locked down by just Nullifying Lantern, and it was still live under the Viridian Protective Trinket. And a lot of these were just kind of ratios to skew back and forth. One more Frozen Dismissal for the Slime decks and other ally-focused decks was really nice. The three Song of Frosts were good for any of the Silvie Nico decks. And also the Tristan deck, because you can play it for free under Viridian Trinket if you're using the Silvie alternate casting cost. And it's such a pivotal card to stop the Icebound slams, because there's really not a lot of mainboard answers. In fact, I think it's just the 3 Tidal Lock, so you're really, really weak to a turn 1 slam. But the coolest card that I thought was the 3 Ravishing Finale. So what had happened was that traditionally I think this deck doesn't really run Nico. But what I was finding was that the deck had a lot of plays where if I were able to level up and deal 4 more damage off of Scepter, that put 3 other things into kill range, where it was like, okay, well, I have to connect with this, and then rely on something else. It just eliminated essentially 1 or 2 swings and made it really guaranteed that they wouldn't have the resources to contest with either the Stratagem or the Rippleback or the Froststorm Paladins or Refracting Missiles, whatever number of kill spells that you had. The extra damage and extra pressure, along with the extra health, really changed things. And then in matchups where I wanted to go long or have a lot more health backup, I was able to also set in the Ravishing Finales and as an alternate win con when something like the Fractal Polar Depths weren't going to cut it because they were bringing out Nullifying Lantern super early into my game plan.
Yeah, it's really cool to see that you just have that additional win con that you can put into your deck. The deck already, as you mentioned earlier at the start of our conversation, has a plethora of ways to win. You can win by combat damage. You can win by allies swinging in. You can win by mill. You can mill out your opponent entirely, either by the Fractal Polar Depths or even your Ravishing Finale. You can even do spell damage with Refracting Missiles and your Stratagem of Myriad Eyes. So there's so many ways for this deck to actually take you out and deal lethal points of damage, and it happens fast. Sometimes we see as quick as like turn 3, turn 4 wins, and all it takes is a turn 1 amazing Icebound Slam into a turn 2 Stratagem, or a Tidestone Bovine milling a couple of cards into a Rippleback, things like that, that just really set this deck apart, and is probably why it is one of the strongest decks you could have played. It is in such good standing and contention with a lot of the current meta, and decks like Merlin really only have one way to win, and this deck can clearly stop it.
Yeah, exactly. A lot of the time I had been struggling with, oh, well, you have to find your win condition in Merlin. So you have to draw the fireballs, you have to draw the ghosts. And if you don't draw those, well, you're kind of just dirtling. And you can have like 10 to 12 card hands that do 2 damage. And you're like, okay, come on. Why do I have all these stupid defensive options that don't do anything? Which you need to make sure the deck works. But you just sit there and dirtle and say, okay, well, I guess I'll pass. You weren't going to kill me, but I still have to wait like 5 turns to find an answer to what's going on. But this deck is just so chock full of them that your opening hand is going to be like, oh, well, here's an Icebound and a Stratagem. I know what my game plan is. Or, oh, there's a Lost in Thought plus a Froststorm Paladin. Well, cool. Now I can play around Frozen Dismissal on turn 2 and just keep going for it. So, yeah, basically everything in this deck is a major threat, and it all needs to be dealt with. Because that's the kind of the win con of the deck in general, is to establish a major board presence and then finish out with any number of finishers.
Sort of one thing that this deck secretly does that at first glance you may not know it, it has an insane amount of draw power. This deck filters so well. As we can look here, just Fractals of Rains can get Floating Memory into that bin as fast as possible. Frostborn Paladins draws you a card. Lost in Thoughts or draw cards. Primordials, go ahead and mill a couple. Ripplebacks draws you a card. Seaside Ringleaders, you don't care if these get milled. Yeah, they're not Floating Memory, but they are a draw into memory and buff your next animal ally, which is crazy to have when you have the likes of a Rippleback with Spell Shroud that can't be targeted. And almost all removal for an ally is a spell these days. So you get that to like 6, 7 toughness. No normal ally deck's going to be able to hit its way through it.
Yeah, exactly. It basically just sets up an unassailable board. And especially because the Seaside Ringleader is every single animal or beast that you play during that turn. So if you're prereq and doing one or two of them, and you have like double bovine or a Rippleback Terrapin and a bovine, they're both going to get those additional buff counters on top of the Sylvie level up. So they're just massive animals that's really, really hard to contest. And once you establish that lock, you're basically just swinging in for that 5 to 7 damage a turn and saying, I'm holding up 12 cards that all say counter, you're not going to take another game action.
Indeed. And while playing this deck, I believe you played for, what was it, 12 rounds of Swiss plus 2 rounds of top 8, is that correct?
3 rounds of top 8, but
Three
yeah,
rounds of top 8. So 15 rounds with this deck. Is there,
it's a lot of rounds.
while playing, is there something that really surprised you that you didn't realize about the deck or caught you off guard?
Yeah, a lot of it is the versatility of how good Stratagem Myriad Ice is. So there was one time where I was playing against a Water Allies deck, and they had turn one Lunette, and that's basically game for this type of deck where you can't establish a board because they go Lunette, Gildas, and now every single ally is just dead. So you can't establish a board unless you're playing two things, and you don't have the draw power to play those two things. But there was a play where I was able to get a couple of float in the yard through like a fractal of rain, and it ended up with being like 8 card hand or something like, or I guess a 9 card hand in this case. And I was able to go, okay, pay one for Chilling Touch, unbalance the Lunette, so now it only has the 1 health. And then I stratagem both the Gildas, the Lunette, and a 2/3. I think it was a Lurking Assailant or something like that, and cleared the board. And even though I was at like 11 or 12 health as Sylvie, they only had 4 or 5 cards. Their scepter had already been fracturized. And basically, the game was there for me to take over from that point by playing a Frostsworn and a Rippleback Terrapin from that point onwards. So the versatility of Stratagem Myriad Ice of being not just a kill spell, but also a way to contest board, to get rid of units, and to clear up tricky situations was really, really impactful, even if it wasn't just going for game.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, that is this card in particular, the one that we have on screen here is, as you said, versatile. It is instances of 3 damage, so it's not all combined total, and you could spread this out. You can target multiple allies, you can target the hero themselves, the champion, and then go from there. And the important part about this card as well is there's windows for your opponent to have to make responses. Is you activate this card from hand and you don't have to declare the floating memory you're banishing right away, which sort of plays a mind game with your opponent, right? You can be like, okay, what are you gonna do? Are you gonna assume I'm clearing board, or am I gonna try and go for lethal here? Like, are you trying to save that amulet you have on the field? Back and forth. So a lot of interesting plays that you can do with that. And the card seems great. It's decks like this really couldn't have functioned as well until AMB came out because you got those powerful tools that really unlocked the style of deck. And it's good to see. Now that was going to bring us into my next question here. Is there any downside to this deck?
Sometimes you can draw a whole lot of counterspell and not a whole lot of action. And other times you can Unga Bunga and Icebound Slam into counterspells. And sometimes the deck has these awkward hands where you don't really have a lot going on, so you kind of just have to bank on hitting an Icebound Slam. And like sometimes you could see like in the finals, my hand was pretty garbage, and I was like, well, if this hits, I win on the spot. If it gets countered, I lose on the spot. But I know that over the course of 4 to 5 turns, I'm going to lose anyways.
Mhm.
So I have to risk it. You just kind of have to send it, and you have to kind of abandon the mentality of I can always play safe because you've shed a lot of the defensive options that the traditional Sylvie Nico deck has. You just don't have the tools that they do to stay long and kind of draw out of a bad situation. Sometimes you kind of got to send it and say if they have it, they have it, but most of the time they don't. So you just kind of get there. But yeah, that's the big thing is because this deck lacks defensive options, you have to know when the risk tolerance is and be able to ride that line of playing risky and playing reserved and knowing when to keep up your interaction and when you can go hands down and try and kill the opponent.
So a little bit more critical thinking when it comes to this deck and being able to pilot it. And I think that's what separates a good player from a great player is that this deck seems probably one of the strongest decks we've seen around in a while, but a great player can take this to top 8, a good player can, possibly do well, but it's those critical decision points is what really matters. And I think that just says a lot for Grandarchive as well, is anyone can do good, but it takes great people to do amazingly, if that makes sense there. And I kind of want to talk about the elephant in the room, Icebound Slam. It's already in category 3 for the ban list.
Hmm.
As someone who has not only played this card, but won with this card multiple times, what do you think is going to be happening to it on February 10th with our new ban list?
Oh, February 1st, I think.
Oh, February
I
1st. I'm
think
sorry.
yeah, I
Yes.
think I think
Woo!
it's Sunday or Saturday. Yeah, it's coming soon. Yeah, Icebound Slime Enjoyers, beware. Uh, I think unfortunately because they've already said that they have an answer to it in the upcoming set. I don't think that it's going to jump immediately to Category 1 and become permanently banned. I think it definitely needs to jump up at least one, if not both. And I would love to just see it get banned. And then as I let the format settle for a little bit, release the new set, let the meta develop, and say, okay, here's the answer. It's actually pretty good. Maybe we can think about putting it back down to category 2 as still a watched card to make sure that it doesn't disrupt the meta too much, but maybe bring that in as a little spice for a mid-season update in case the meta gets stale with a new set.
Would you consider the Icebound Slam an unhealthy card in our current environment?
Yeah, so right now, I think the question that you got to ask with Icebound Slam is what doesn't it do? And I think the answer is basically nothing. It does usually 8 damage for most decks that are running all the water cards. If it hits, it's going to deal 8. It sets up anywhere from 1 to like 3-ish float on average. So you're set up for the rest of the game in terms of materializations, in terms of Frostborn usages, and it sets the tempo so far back because your opponent now has to say, okay, well, I don't have an intercept unit, so that means I have to level. Well, I played a suboptimal turn 1, assuming that they weren't playing water and I was going to be able to survive next turn. But now I have to bring out Nullifying Lantern. But if I milled 3 float, well, I could just die to Stratagem. So I have to bring out Safeguard Amulet. So it brings into this element of I have to have too many things on my second turn if the water player is going second in order to be able to interact with this. And I mean, there are games where I just went Icebound Slammed, milled 3 or 4 float, and said, I'm sorry, man, it doesn't matter what you do. I have a second slam and a stratagem. You are just factually dead. And, if they let me get off a second Icebound Slam, that's great. Now you have to go to level 2 at 8 health or 6 health.
Yeah.
And I have double Frostsworns. I've drawn cards. I'm up in tempo. I have a Scepter out. Like, it's just not going well for you. And the only thing I've done is play one card. Whereas, they've had to do things to level up, to protect themselves, to do all these things. So it's so much offensive threat that it just really can't be mitigated by one card. And so I'm really interested to see what they have planned as a counter to it or, a way to taper it down. But at the moment, it does too much and it doesn't have enough counterplay. Because like if you put up an intercept unit, great. I'm still icebound slamming that because I get 5 float in the yard and I kill a unit. Like that's a really efficient use of my resources in my turn because you're not going to kill me next turn.
Mhm.
So if the downside is the counterplay and you're still fine with that trade, that's where a huge problem is.
That makes a lot of sense. And it's really great to have the insight of a higher level player, someone who does have a lot of reps on a deck using the card. Because, a lot of times there's discourse in the community where people will say, like, oh, this card's broken, this card's busted, but there's not really a lot of factual evidence or like theory behind it. It may just be a poor experience against the card. But it's starting to feel like a consensus from a lot of people is just Icebound Slime, as you said, does everything and is just too good for what it does, and that makes a lot of sense. We will just have to sit tight though and see what does happen, because maybe the answer in HVN coming up is going to be insane. Every deck can run it, and it just really shuts down this card. And I think it would be great to see sort of in rock paper scissors developed because of it. Then something like that, but that is in the future, and maybe we can reevaluate this when that set comes out. We do have a little special surprise. I'm not going to make the announcement in this video, but you guys will be seeing Taige a lot more on this channel as well with a couple of other people. So, going to be exciting, going to be fun for that. Sort of going to wrap things up here. For everyone watching here at home, Taige, is there any specific like changes you would make to this deck after playing it that you would be like, ooh, it'd be really nice to have this now instead with that hindsight?
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing is that Quicksilver Grail. Being able to put a whole bunch of defensive options under it and be able to pull them out exactly when I want it. That would be the biggest thing that I'd like to change out of this. And don't be mad if you pull out the Nullifying Mirror and run into a bunch of Kongming Razor Gale decks. That's on you, buddy.
Yeah, it's because I have a feeling that a lot of people are going to try putting together this deck, and, they're going to experience the thrill of turn 1 Icebound Slam into turn 2 Stratagem and get addicted to how fun water is to play right now in this current metagame.
Yep. And for all you Icebound Slam enjoyers, when you look another water player in the face and they're going first, most of the time with the traditional Silvie Nico build, they have about a 44% chance to stop your Icebound Slam. So if you have that slam in hand, it's better than a coin flip. Just go for it. Unga bunga, let's slam.
Perfect. All right, Taige. And any closing thoughts or anything you want to say to the community or the people who were cheering you on and supporting you during the Ascent?
Yeah, it was great to have all of my friends, teammates, and my partner there with me, cheering me on throughout the event. It was a really, really fantastic experience to go and be able to explore Utrecht and Amsterdam during the time that we were there. And it still really hasn't sunk in to making it to the top 2 into finals of Ascent. It's been a goal of mine to try and get a spirit, and I'm just super happy that I could do it and have all my friends and family supporting me from it. I got a whole bunch of messages from personal friends and family while I was on stream rooting for me, and so that was just super cool to see. And I hope that I can do it more in the future.
Awesome, Taige. Once again, congratulations. You deserved it. Being a world's competitor into everything you've done, just being your first ever top 8 Ascent is amazing. So congratulations to you. That is something that you should be very proud of and, you know, walk around because, people have their eyes on you, expectations, and the next Ascent coming up is Ascent Seattle. So we'll just have to see what you might have in store for and, what you might be brewing and working with. But once again, everyone, that is the conversation for a later day. That is after HVN releases, so we will get to that when we get to that. So thank you all very much for watching this Deck Tech, and thank you, Taige, for being here, and I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day or night, and take care.